Good morning again, everyone. I like to start off my presentations by saying one of the reasons I went to law school is because I hate two things, numbers and technology. And yet I find myself having to deal with both more than I enjoy. My name is Ameena again. I work for the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Greater Los Angeles Area Chapter. I'm the Deputy Director and the Staff Attorney. So what I want to speak to you a bit about today is how the sweep of anti-Sharia law legislation and how it is affecting and impacting the broader public sphere. I think Dr. Badawi's presentation was really good to really give us an idea of how, from a practicing Muslim, how we view Sharia law, what it means to us. It is not just something that informs our interactions necessarily, but it is essentially our higher values. And to have a concerted, sweeping effort across the country to dehumanize Islam and Muslims, to minimize the impact that Sharia law, the place that it has in our life, is really, really problematic. So a lot of the anti-Sharia paranoia that we see uses a few basic things. And one is that Muslims seek to take over the country. I don't know how they found out about this, but apparently they found out that he came over here to take over the country, or we chose to be born here to take over the country. We told God, I want to be born in America so I can take it over. And now we're going to take over the country through the implementation of Sharia law. How they refer to Sharia law, again, is as a foreign entity. It's almost like this foreign monster with many heads, many teeth, many arms and legs that is coming and has its own, a mind of its own, essentially.
So that they can see better.
But as you heard Dr. Badawi very eloquently state, that's exactly what Sharia law is not. And they also build on the fear that Sharia law means the end to our Constitution and the body of our system of laws. Essentially, that the American Constitution and our jurisprudence in the United States, our system of laws, our court systems, our statutes, are not strong enough to withstand this sort of threat. That somehow, even though you can go back to the Magna Carta, common law has been developing for the last millennia, that somehow that is threatened by Sharia law and is going to be obliterated. The primary misconceptions of Islam and Muslims that drive this, and this is according to the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, one of their researchers. ISPU has some amazing publications on Sharia law. I would highly recommend you visit their website. So one of the things they say is that Muslims hold very different values compared to other cultures and religions. A second thing is American Muslims reject Western norms and values in favor of Muslims' different values and different norms. That somehow the two are mutually exclusive. You can't have a Western value and a Western quote-unquote value and an Islamic value and have it be one and the same. And that Muslims, again, are determined to impose their value system on non-Muslims through the legal system. Now, there have been over 2 dozen Sharia, anti-Sharia bills introduced across the country. This map is courtesy of the Center for American Progress. They also have done amazing work on this. I'm going to be citing to one of their reports quite a bit. It's called Fear Inc. I highly, highly, highly recommend everyone go online and look at that report and get a copy as well. Another report I'm going to be citing quite often is an Islamophobia report called Same Hate, New Target, published by CARE, and I believe Dr. Bazian with the UC Berkeley. So this map shows the Sharia law legislation across the country. Again, over 2 dozen, so there are actually a few that are not on this map. Can you guys make out the colors, the color distinctions? Okay, so the hot pink is bills that have passed in at least one chamber. The kind of rosy pink are bills introduced to ban international Sharia law. And this is a little outdated because some of these bills have actually failed, so they have not passed. And the kind of darkish maroon is court bans on international and Sharia law have actually been enacted. So those states are Arizona, Arizona, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Tennessee, the dark-colored ones, in which the state legislatures have actually passed these laws, and they have been enacted. Now, where are these laws coming from? Well, first of all, the form that they take is usually a proposed constitutional amendment to the state constitution. So in most states, you have two houses, two legislative bodies. Usually it's like the Assembly and the Senate. A bill gets introduced, and then it has to be put on the floor to vote in both houses, and if it passes, then it becomes law. In some states, it needs also a voter referendum, so the voters have to vote to approve that constitutional amendment. So many of these laws have actually been introduced, many of them by right-wing conservatives, by Republicans, those with evangelical Christian connections. A lot of the proponents of these bills view Islam as an imminent and real threat to the Judeo-Christian values. Like I said before, it's a clash of values that they think is occurring, and that it's a threat to the vision the founding fathers had for this country. For example, Rex Duncan was one of the authors for Oklahoma's state question. It's called State Question 755. That was the bill that was introduced. And he described Sharia arbitration tribunals in England as, quote unquote, a cancer. He considered, quote unquote, Sharia finance and Islamic law as a threat to the American way of life. However, as I'll tell you, this was not upheld by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals that affirmed that this law was actually unconstitutional. In the New Jersey case, which I'll get to as well, a lot of supporters cite a New Jersey domestic violence case, which seemingly elevated portions of Sharia law above state law, despite that case being reversed and remanded on appeal. And what happened in the Oklahoma case was that the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals said, essentially, you guys haven't cited one case where Sharia law has, their vision of Sharia law has actually been implemented and where it has superseded American law. They were not able to cite one single case that has happened. And a lot of this anti-Sharia paranoia is not restricted just to the state legislative process. There's also been a lot of support from elected officials or those who were seeking to be elected, such as Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann, Newt Gingrich, who all have cited the sort of the risk of Sharia law and the risk of its being implemented in the United States. So essentially, there's a lot of fear-mongering going on. And what is happening is that this fear-mongering is the result of a concerted effort from the Islamophobia industry, which is essentially composed of a few actors and a few organizations. And what they have done is funneled this sort of fear-mongering and paranoia to the masses, and the masses are starting to use this more and more in everyday life. So what you see, again, are these bills being introduced, some being passed, some failing. The ones that have failed in recent months include one in Minnesota, one in Georgia that failed, and one in New Jersey that was also withdrawn. So really quickly, I'll go through a few case studies. The first is Oklahoma. Did any of you hear about the Oklahoma one? It started about a few years ago? A few, okay. So this was introduced in 2010. In, I think, November of 2010, 70%, again, remember I mentioned the voter referendums that occur. So it passed both legislative bodies in Oklahoma State. And then 70% of the voters approved the quote-unquote Save Our State ballot initiative. What this initiative was an amendment to the state constitution, and it would prohibit the consideration of Sharia law and foreign law in state courts. So essentially what it was saying is that a United States judge, a state judge, could not implement or consider Sharia law in its decisions. So for example, let's say a couple is going through a divorce, and they had come to they had mediated it according to Islamic, their understanding of what Islam prescribes for custody or for division of the estate. And they've come to this agreement, and they have to have it kind of signed off by the court. Well, what this law would say is that a judge can't do that because it was based on the Islamic interpretation of what two parties consented to do. Another example would be somebody passes away, and in their will, they actually say, this much is going to my mother, this much is going to my children, this much, et cetera, and that what would happen is that a judge sees that, gets that will, and he or she essentially cannot sanction that testamentary instrument because it was based off of Sharia law. Well, thankfully, after it was passed, immediately somebody filed an injunction with local state court to bar the certification of the results. That person was actually the executive director of CARE Oklahoma, as in his individual capacity to say that when I die or get married, I want to be able to practice my faith. And then recently, and the court issued the permanent injunction saying, first temporary, then the permanent injunction saying that this law cannot go into effect. And in January 2012, as I said, the 10th Circuit affirmed that the provision was in fact unconstitutional. What's interesting, and what I think later speakers will get into the kind of legalities and the differences, is that this particular bill specifically mentioned Sharia law. The anti-Sharia law movement's gotten a little bit smarter. And so a lot of the newer bills we're seeing do not specifically state Sharia law or Islamic law. What they say is just the implementation of foreign law. But in the hearings, and the supporters of the bills use a lot of anti-Muslim Islamophobic rhetoric. The Tennessee case, the bill was introduced in early 2011. It was one of the worst cases, the most extreme cases of an anti-Sharia law bill. And what it said was that it empowered the Attorney General to basically designate organizations as Sharia organizations, and that anybody who provided material to support to one of these organizations could be found or convicted of a felony offense punishable by up to 15 years in prison. A lot of the hearing testimony in that situation was filled with anti-Muslim rhetoric. Some suggested that the local Muslim student associations and the mosque be designated as Sharia organizations. Because of the blowback against this extreme version, it was amended. Instead of saying Sharia organizations, it said terrorist organizations, but it was passed in June 2011. And in New Jersey, again, there's over 24, so I'm just giving you a few. In New Jersey, it was introduced in late 2011. This is one of the ones that prohibited the application of foreign law. And it was introduced by this assemblywoman named Holly Shapisi. And she actually withdrew the bill last month in March 2012. And she cited, and her quote is up there, she cited her conversations with Muslim community members who said that this would continue to cast them in a negative light and make their life really, really difficult, of course. So she actually withdrew that bill, so that's a very positive example. One of the core people behind this, as I said, is the Islamophobic industry. One of the people within that, he's an attorney, his name is David Yerushalmi, and he has actually drafted model legislation. And that legislation has been used in at least 12 states. So he's kind of making it his life mission to sort of fight Sharia law and to essentially make sure these bills are enacted across the country. He's very tied to the Islamophobic network, including the Center for Security Policy and Frank Gaffney. I really suggest you go to the Fear Inc. report, which really clearly outlines how he's used his position to spread anti-Sharia sentiment. I'm gonna go. So how is this affecting public sentiment? A lot of you have probably heard these statistics, so I won't go through them. But about 38%, according to a Pew Foundation study, 38% of Americans who are not Muslim said that they had an unfavorable view of Islam and Muslims. And that number was 48% according to an ABC poll. And this was right around the Park 51 controversy, also known as the Ground Zero Mosque controversy. And in that, there was a lot of rhetoric about the spread of Sharia law and down with Sharia. So again, you can see how that was used at the grassroots level. This has also resulted, I think, in a lot of discrimination that we see on the ground. In 2009, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission reported that complaints from Muslims had increased 60% from 2005. That's a typo. So between 2005 and 2009, there was a 60% increase in employment discrimination complaints from Muslims. And in 2010 as well, or 2011, excuse me, the Orange County Human Relations Commission reported that hate crimes against Muslims were up 150%. These are some graphs that you can find in the Islamophobia report that CARE and UC Berkeley put together, as I mentioned. And as far as how this is affecting Muslim attitudes, 60% of Muslims say that they face prejudice from most Americans, 60%. 48% of Muslims say that they have personally experienced racial or religious discrimination in the last year. And Muslims are about 20% less comfortable than Protestant and Catholics to practice their faith in public. So Protestants and Catholics are about 85% comfortable practicing their faith in public, and the Muslim number is about 60 to 65%. So as you can see, I do think that a lot of this anti-Sharia paranoia is seeping down into the grassroots level as grassroots organizations like Act for America really use this anti-Muslim rhetoric for their own political purposes and agenda, and it's really affecting people on the ground. So I hope that gives you a good idea of kind of what's going on across the country, and if I've said anything correct, it's by the grace of God, and if I've said anything wrong or offensive, it's my own fault, and please feel free to correct me. I'm always looking to improve. Thank you all very much. Assalamu alaikum.